I'm old, and the three of you are in charge. Would you like me to invite people to come closer? Do you feel comfortable with how you are?
It's up to them if they feel awesome. Some of them probably, we're going to dip out later on, so everybody should be fine.
Okay. So if you work with me, you'll pick up on this more. I'm fully deaf in my right ear. I'm getting blind and deaf. And I can't see. Okay. All right. So is it a good time to start? Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Hillary Moss. I am here to welcome you to HES festivities. This is the chair's plenary, and I am so delighted to have all of you here and also to have the three of you together. Jalen Woodard and EJ Collins, who are my program coordinators, know that I had this dream in my head for a year before I actually told anybody else that this was my dream. So I'm incredibly delighted to welcome Professor Stefan Bradley from Amherst College, Professor Eddie Cole from UCLA, and Dr. Feeman Hrabowski from University of Maryland, Baltimore campus. Yes, great. I said UMBC. I said that my remarks and opening would be brief. I just want to share a little bit about why I wanted this conversation to occur. So Dr. Hrabowski has been to Amherst a couple of times while we've been teaching. And I also wanted to thank Amherst College. I forgot to do that. They're helping to finance the filming of the event so other people can watch. And I used to teach a course with a mathematician on inequality in mathematics education, which is how your name came up in addition to your work with the Meyerhoff Scholars. As any of you who attend HES know, Dr. Hrabowski is surrounded by two of the finest scholars of African American higher education and also HES book winners in the last couple of years. Stefan Bradley upending the Ivory Tower, and Eddie Cole, who won, I believe, in 2001 for the campus color line.
Oh, he won all of 2021, 20, 22.
Everything.
Yeah.
So my hope is that this would be a casual conversation among friends, so many friends. Sorry about that. A casual conversation among friends to reflect on African American education, activism, excellence, higher education in a historical context. And with that, I will leave you fuzzy water and get out of the way. Thank you all for coming.
Maybe I'll go ahead and start tonight's conversation. When Hillary, our fearless leader, reached out to us and said, would you be interested in having a conversation with Feeman Hrabowski? I didn't answer the email because I thought she could only be playing, that I wouldn't seriously get the opportunity to speak to somebody who has been a hero to so many of us on so many different levels. And so tonight we'll get a chance to talk with somebody who has, since boyhood, been an advocate for the people. And so we're very thankful to be here tonight, and I'm very thankful to be here with Professor Eddie Cole, who has been showing us all how to do it. Now he's a West Coaster, and I went to the East Coast. But we decided the format for tonight is we were going to do it, maybe some of you all would recognize it, we're going to do it Run DMC style is what we're going to do. And so, and of course, Dr. Hrabowski is Jam Master Jay, and he makes it happen, for us. And so, but as we slide into this, the questions that I had should be fairly brief, but informative for all of us. Dr. Hrabowski is the winner of countless leadership awards for his presidency of the mighty University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He's been president, he's been highlighted here, highlighted there, but I think probably his best title is that of jailbird in my mind. President Hrabowski, when he was a 12-year-old, found himself inside of a jail cell. This, to me, was the part that endeared me to the president. Now, I'd like to ask, what about your youth brought you to jail, President Hrabowski?
Yeah. I'm delighted to be with all of you. I have to begin by saying some of my colleagues from my graduate alma mater, University of Illinois, are here tonight. Delighted to see them. I was with them last week and having this kind of wonderful conversation with my dear, dear friend Jim Anderson. Yes. And it was quite a conversation. It is equally humbling to me to be with two people of the next generation, some of you can appreciate that, who are scholars already, and then to see two young men, EJ and Jalen, from Amherst College as students. Give those students a round of applause, would you? So I am a Southerner. I grew up in Birmingham, went to Hampton and then Illinois, to my beloved Hampton, and I will tell you, I was sitting in the back of the church in 1963. I was 12. I had skipped a few grades. I was very nerdy. I loved mathematics. I got goosebumps doing math. And the way my parents could placate me in having to be in church in the middle of the week was to allow me to do the two things I loved most, math and eating. So I was eating M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts, very important. And I was doing the word problems. And I was listening to this gentleman at the lectern who said, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our children know this difference between right and wrong, and they want a better education. And our children will be able to go to better schools. Now, we had some wonderful black teachers. We didn't have the resources, and I hated the fact that we always had to use these hand-me-down books from white schools that they'd put brown paper bags around. And I looked up and I said, who is that guy? And of course, his name was Martin King, Reverend Martin King. I went home, told my parents, I've got to go. And they said, absolutely not. And I said to them, my parents were teachers, Dad had left teaching, but I said, you guys are hypocrites. You wanted me to go, I went. You told me to listen, I did listen. He wants me to go, and now you won't. You think I'm better than other kids? They said, no. It's not that we don't trust you. We don't trust what might happen, because if you march, you're going to jail. And they sent me to my room because I said to them, you're hypocrites. Go to your room, boy. And the story ends when my parents come in the next morning and say, we're going to let you go. We've been praying all night. We'll put you in God's hands. And I did go. It was an empowering week, though it was a horrible, traumatic experience for children. We were treated like slaves, like animals. Too many people, not enough restrooms. Not enough beds. But in the middle of the week, Dr. King came, and our parents are there, and I'm trying to supervise some of the younger kids, and he said, what you do this day will have an impact on children who've not yet been born. And that's that story. My goodness. That was it.
My goodness. And so to set the scene for all of this, you were in the place they called Birmingham. You were in the place where the segregationist stalwart, Theophilus, Eugene Bull Connor.
You've done your history. You
were there.
Done your homework.
How do you see all of this and still manage to make grades at school? How do you do this?
Sure. First of all, most of the children who went to jail, who marched, were from the projects. Children of middle-class people heard their parents saying that their employers had said, if your child marches, you may lose your job. And I'll never forget the Board of Education telling all teachers just that. My mother was saying I was too young to go. I said, but Mom, you were fired from your job in 1948 for leading the protests on the equalization of teacher salaries in 1948. She was always very proud of that. And she said, yeah, but I was older. I said, but I've benefited from your experience. And she did let me go. The key is, though, that when you were a teacher's child, you just had more books in the house, right? And the books, the reading made, so I was always an A student, and I was skipping grades because I had the privilege of having educated parents. That made the difference. My book, Holding Fast to Dreams, talks about growing up middle class in Birmingham. People forget the diversity of backgrounds of the black community. I grew up with Angela Davis. She was a few years older. Her mother taught me, my mother taught her and her sister before they went off to school in the North, as we said. I grew up 3 years behind me was Condi Rice. Her father was my counselor, was my high school counselor. A little older than all of us, Alma Powell, Cullen Powell's wife, whose uncle was my principal. So it was middle class Birmingham. At the same time, we could not, EJ and Jalen, we couldn't drink out of a nice water fountain. The one that said colored was dirty. You couldn't go in the bathroom. You couldn't go to the movies. So they kept us in a cocoon in our middle class bed. But they kept saying we want the best. So I was privileged to have a mother who was an English teacher who became a math teacher. So I was reading Dostoevsky when I was 12. She was using characters from books, Raskolnikov, when I was being arrogant, or Bigger from A Native Son, and Mr. Bledsoe from Invisible Man. She would use those characters when punishing me. I'd be embarrassed because my friends wouldn't know what I was talking about, but I would. But that was privilege. That was privilege. So I was supposed to do well academically.
This is my last little one, and I'm going to pass the mic to DMC.
I love it. You know, I'm with the next generation because I don't even know who DMC is. Barely. Some of y'all don't know who DMC is either.
But here you were, this is just after Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah. And we're in a room full of educators, historians of education, and we know that these schools weren't desegregating very well.
No, right.
Here you were a student at, what do they call it now? High population density black students.
Sure.
Tell me about prospects for college and why you decided on the college that you went to. It's a particular college. Yeah. Probably at that time, top 3, 4.
My neighborhood. It was 1960. I gave a talk about this at Harvard several weeks ago as a commemorative lecture of the 60th anniversary of Dr. King speaking at the Harvard Law School in October this month in 1962. And what was significant was he spoke there in October and he came to Birmingham a few months later and inspired me to go to jail. So it was very, very touching to me. But one of the points was that at that time, remember, only 10% of Americans had gone to college. And when I asked people that question, only 3 or 4% of blacks, but only 11% of whites. But among the middle class, so you didn't have a lot of people, but among that group, once one person goes to college, people want other people to go to college. So my parents were constantly working with kids on filling out forms, and of course, I was going to college. They had sent me to Massachusetts to study in Springfield to see what it would be like to be in school with white kids. And they did that because I was invited to go be a part of the Friends program in the North to follow in the footsteps of Angela and others who had gone there. But my parents, quite frankly, didn't trust whites. They said they're probably good people, but we worried that you may get there and not want to appreciate who you are from Birmingham. And you need to be in your black church every Sunday so you know who you are. So they compromised by allowing me to go and see what it would be like to be in school with white kids. And I learned 2 things. The kids were not mean to me. I was simply invisible. Not only would the children not speak to me, the teachers would not speak to me. And I've been back to Springfield and told this story. And nobody, and they got the point. They really did. I mean, I would raise my hand when nobody else would, when they would ask for an answer, nobody knew it, and I would want to try, and they'd look right through me. That was my experience in Springfield. But the education The academic experience was far superior in literature, in algebra 2, in chemistry. And I was younger. I was 13. Those kids were 16. But I was going to the 11th grade, right? And I was accustomed to being the best in the class. And that I was in the middle probably, but I didn't know they would, it was just not, I was not treated like a regular child.
My goodness.
I knew that. And you never forget that.
My goodness.
You never, and teachers have such, and that helped to shape my thinking about the role of leaders and teachers on students.
My goodness.
Yeah.
How old were you when you headed off to Hampton?
Well, I was invited to go to Morehouse at 14, a year earlier, and I wanted to because I wanted to beat Martin King.
Yeah. There was another young phenom who went off to college at about that age, and you were about to say.
Yeah, Martin King went to Morehouse at 15. Yeah. I liked the fact that I was invited to go at 14. I was always competitive, and at the last minute, my mother said, "You may be precocious in math, but you're not precocious in life." Ooh. And you go into that big city, Atlanta, compared to little Birmingham. I just can't let you go. Huh. I didn't speak to her for ages. I really didn't. And so she was, and they knew Dr. Mays, who was our hero, really, Benjamin Mays, the greatest of college presidents ever. And yes. She was ready for me to go to Morehouse. The next year, I had been very rebellious. I got my own forms, and I decided to go way up north. I went to Virginia, to Hampton. To people in Alabama, Virginia is way up north. Yes, right? Yes. And as a fellow Alabamian. Yes. And so Amherst is out of the question. But the reason, and I had gotten some invitations to go to New England. Several of my friends on our street went to Mount Holyoke and other places, but my parents had seen how I was treated in Massachusetts. And they said, "You are our treasure. We cannot risk your feeling as ordinary as you felt." And I will say to you, and I have so many friends who went to the Ivies and others, and they were strong enough to make it, but they were not given the strong sense of self that I received in Hampton. So then when I went to Illinois, even though it was still a difficult story, a difficult situation, those of us from HBCUs had been taught, you don't let anyone else define who you are. Whatever you do, you go and see that professor, whether he looks at you like you're not supposed to be there or not. And it made a difference, it really did. That's my story, yeah.
No, I love that and appreciate that as a fellow Alabamian. Let me ask you sort of a transition.
I have to say, it is so unusual. I can get the fact that somebody from the military family, in one of a story, has had the benefit of certain schools, but it's a big deal. I'm from the city of Birmingham. That's a big deal, all right, Birmingham. He's from the country, we say. For him to be where he is today is, for both of them, though, but I want you to just understand the probability of that happening. You know, you get certain advantages and you move ahead, but it is huge. Would you give him a round of applause? Just give him a round. But the idea of being first generation college and tenured faculty, give him a round of applause too. Okay. All right, go ahead.
First, thank you for that. But let me ask you sort of a transition question from your early life into the professional post-Illinois, right?
Yes.
And I can appreciate your sentiment around the HBCU experience, myself going to Tennessee State. And then you get into Illinois, but you start your career, you come back home to Alabama. And you start your career as a faculty member at Alabama A&M.
Right.
And then you come out here to Baltimore, you work at Coppin State for a few years.
Right.
I think many of us as academics can appreciate just how crucial that first 5 to 7 years of your career is in shaping your perspective. Your early career was shaped at HBCUs, at Black college campuses.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about those experiences professionally and how that shaped how you saw your future career going.
Sure. So let me just say that one of the experiences I learned from Illinois was that you don't have to have everybody who's in your corner. You just have to have a few people who really care. So I mentioned several of them, Dr. Joanne Fly in higher education, seeing Jim Anderson finishing his dissertation and eventually coming on the faculty there made a big difference. Colleagues who were grad students with me, and Bob Waller, Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences, was on my committee. Richard Barksdale, who was a Harvard man and in the literature, who was on the committee. So there were just a few people who kept saying, you don't allow others to make you feel ordinary. Allow yourself to be ordinary. And that made the difference. but I knew that I wanted to go back to my roots, and that would be where my family had gone, HBCUs.
Yeah.
I'd come from Hampton, and it was a nurturing environment with a lot of white faculty, very nurturing. It never occurred to me that I would spend most of my life in a predominantly white setting, because at that time, everybody was very segregated. Even though you were on a big white campus, the black grad students were together, black undergrads were together. Now, one of the things I've said in my talks, and I said it at Harvard that some people don't like, is we're still hyper-segregated on campuses. That is a problem. That is a problem. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be times when people of any race, gender, LGBTQ will have times to share things they have in common. But I would argue that we have to find ways to create a culture that encourages in the classroom and beyond the classroom substantive conversations across groups. Because if they don't do it in college, where are they going to do it? And that's the elephant in the room in higher education, hyper-segregation. And if I don't say it now, I won't say it. You get my point? And so what I'm saying is I start there. And so I went back to what was comfortable at HBCUs. And what I found, though, was that the experience as an administrator was a little different from that as a student, because I was young. I was a dean. I became a dean at 26, and they called me the boy dean. And it wasn't meant affectionately. It really was not. And in the black community, you really don't get respect until you get over 45. So both of you, you just barely, you really.
Come on.
And that's just the real story. So I was really, students loved me, but I had a tough time. I really did. But it did teach me to be tougher. I was just thinking, oh, the Illinois is one way in, the black colleges are so nurturing. No. On any campus, you have people who can be nurturing and supportive and others who are not, of any race. That was and one of the fact that I was bringing in more faculty with specialties, and you could only find some people who were white, I was accused of liking white people too much. Right? When I'm trying to bring in the best people for these students. And that's just the real deal, that really is. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that my experience at Illinois and the ones at the HBCUs before I went to UMBC 35 years ago taught me to do two things. Number one, don't assume I know people or an environment based on race.
Okay.
And number two, to not forget who I am in what I do. All right. And number three, learn from those experiences. For example, at HBCUs, that can be helpful. The idea of the nurturing environment for students. Yeah. And that is true in some settings, in some departments, not across the board. In science, where my specialty in teaching about science, fact is that the majority of Americans of all races are wiped out of science and engineering, leave it within the first 2 years. I've chaired the National Academy's committee on that. And that's not just for blacks and Latinos. Only 32% of whites who start with a major in science or engineering will graduate with a bachelor's in those areas. For Asians, it's 41%. And so you put it all together, the fact is that if it were not for people coming from other countries here to grad school, when it comes to the science and technology infrastructure of America, we would not be anything like as advanced as we are. All you have to do is look at the leading professors, the Nobel laureates, the people in the national agencies, the people in the companies. My point is that we have a lot of work to do at all kinds of institutions in being more nurturing, particularly in certain disciplines. Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned the work ahead for us.
Yes.
Because it makes me think about your earlier point around we don't communicate across difference.
Yes.
And you mentioning growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, so you have a childhood memory of a really divided political moment, right? Yeah. And then we can fast forward to today. Yeah. As we think about yourself as a higher education leader, you've done this for decades now. What strategies come to mind as a president when you look out at university campuses and getting us to actually talk across difference, to interact across difference, and have meaningful dialogue across difference, not the symbolic conversation.
No, I get it.
But just the actual conversation.
I get it. So my newest book with colleagues we wrote is entitled The Empowered University, and the subtitle is Shared Leadership, Culture Change, and Academic Success. And the first sentence in the book is written in my voice, says, it's not about me, it's about us. And we argue that in our society, And in our universities, we have to get away from thinking about the leader. The leader is the one responsible, because while any one person can make a difference, we need this shared leadership idea of faculty, of staff administrators. When talking about becoming more inclusive as campuses, a dean can't do it. I spent the morning in Washington with the National Council of Deans of Arts and Sciences, and their theme was on democracy and deans, and we talked about democracy in the liberal arts. And I said several things. One, I work with new presidents. I mentioned I worked with the new president of Amherst this summer, and President Spelman, and Hampton, and other places. But I made this comment. We all talk about or complain about Congress, but almost everyone in Congress is one of our products. They graduated from one of our institutions. And on the other hand, we always talk about how wonderful the liberal arts education is, and it is, but we're missing the boat somewhere. Not just with students, look at our leaders. We do not know how to agree to disagree with civility. We teach people to win the argument at any cost. And this is my opinion, but the fact, and what happens is, we are not finding that common ground that Justice Brandeis talked about for citizens. And Fred Lawrence, the head of Phi Beta Kappa, this idea of teaching people to present their arguments and back it up with evidence, to listen to other points of view and really listen carefully, and then to find where can we find some common ground. And that is where we are now. But now when my students say things have never been this bad, I tell them, go back to history. The 60s, the 1960s, or the 1860s. You know, I love it when people say, we want to go back to the good old days. I don't know those days, particularly for certain groups. It's never really been the good old days. I mean, we've been at some points when we've not been this crazy when thinking about what truth is, but just, I made the comment, somebody said, why today? They said, well, why didn't you go to one of the white schools? I mean, the schools were supposed to be integrated in 1954. The late 50s, they tried to integrate in my town. And good people came out to throw rocks at the children's heads.
My goodness.
Rocks at their heads. And then and that didn't work. And then when they tried to get people into the university, if you're old enough, how many of you were in the world in 1963? How many of you have been born before 1963? That is perfectly disgusting. I want you to know that. Perfectly disgusting. Wait a minute. So when I tell you this, it's not just Jalen and EJ. It's all of you. I mean, this is what you've read in the book. But I sat there looking at the governor of my state saying, no, not going to
run for president.
I'm going to run for president, and I'm going to show you we're not going to let people into. So my point is, we've been through these periods before, and people are asking the question right now, what do we do when the election, whatever the results? And my point is that we do need to have the tough conversations. We in universities can help by helping people to think about the Rose concept of the whole vote, right? And the notion of teaching people to think critically, and to build enough trust among groups on our campuses that we can say what we really think. The worst thing that can happen is for 40% of the people to feel differently from the rest and to not say what they really think, because then they just leave and they're the same way. It's the idea, are we examining our lives? And we can all learn from different sides. So we're going to need, I think after this election, I think the time for the humanities, for history, for strong critical thinking skills, and for the tough conversations. In an environment that keeps people from immediately being called a racist or keeps people from immediately going into the hatred mode, to keep things calm enough so we can understand why people think as they do. We've got to do that. We have no choice.
You know, this is a great point, and you really sort of segue nicely into the next question I was going to ask, because you said you were just speaking to the deans, the Council of Deans of Arts and Sciences. And, you know, so many of us being historians of education, so we're in the humanities and social sciences. But, you know, a lot of people look at your profile and say, look at this champion for STEM.
Yeah, he's STEM.
Right.
But you're having this conversation and you're talking to people in the arts and sciences, humanities, social sciences. How have you been able to sort of, you know, obviously be as prolific and successful and creating access and opportunity in STEM fields, but also have a broader conversation across higher education
I appreciate that.
to scholars like us, and sort of, because if you're going to talk about not speaking across differences,
That's a thing.
Across the
You're
disciplines.
right.
No, it's an excellent question. I said today several things. Number one, that most people don't realize that when we say the liberal arts, I always tease my colleagues on campus and saying, people in the humanities and social sciences claim the liberal arts, but they don't, and it's true, they are right there, political science, history, philosophy, those areas. But math and science are part of the liberal arts, squarely in the liberal arts. Go all the way back. Most Americans don't know that this is it's about a way of thinking. It's about producing critical thinking. It's about how we broaden our judgment. It's about learning how to listen intently. And so I first of all, when I said I get goosebumps with the math, I see math everywhere. The beauty of math is all around us. But here's the deal. I often talk about the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or, and that is not my concept. It's from Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. We tend to think of ourselves either, how many of you knew by the time you were after your first or second year of college, you were either a math science type or you were a history English type? Raise your hands.
Well before.
Yeah, or before, right? And that's exactly the way we teach things. And I criticize, if you look at my TED Talk, it's on 4 pillars of success in science, but what I now say is it's true in the humanities. It's about 4 things. 1, high expectations, not just of the students though, but of faculty. If I teach a course in differential equations and I put some problems on the board, and everybody says, wow, he's really smart, and then I give a test and nobody passes the test, have I taught it?
You failed too.
You see, that's the point right now, particularly in STEM. Once we put it on the board, we've done our job. And that's what I'm challenging my colleagues about. But building community in the work, whatever it's about, talking about ideas or it's working on some problems in chemistry. But then it takes humanists to produce humanists, as it takes scientists to produce scientists. We pull people into the work. We get them excited about history. I love the way that amazingly, as you talk about what you want to do and your background and you're rooting in the history areas. And then finally, just being honest with ourselves about what's working and what's not working. So I would say for me, first of all, getting people to stop thinking only about one area. More and more, we talk about interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, but we don't live it. I think data science is one of those areas where we have this intersection of the social sciences and statistics, maybe some computing, and more the social sciences are the most important piece of that. And we see that in different ways. Digital humanities, right? And so I think we have to think about how we can get people to stop thinking math is not for me. It's not that you have to become a mathematician, but they're fundamental points. Let me just give you one. I was chairing the Marguerite Casey Foundation in Seattle. We work with the 5 states that have almost half of all poor children. What states do you think those are? I heard Mississippi.
Let's see, Arkansas.
Arkansas. So here's the deal. The southern states, our state, Alabama, Mississippi, all of those have the largest concentration of poverty.
That's right.
But the largest numbers will be Texas, Florida, Illinois, New York,
California.
Yeah. Now, what people don't know is those same states have the largest number of poor children of all races and the largest number of rich children. They are a microcosm of the country. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, we decided we wanted to do some things with the Deep South, and so we were going to support a Republican governor in Alabama because he was going for $1 billion bill to help in education. Okay. And it would have been a minimum amount for every family. But the lobbyists used the fact that people don't like education and what looked like a huge amount because it was some percent. And they said, you're going to go poor from this. But the base was so small that it really wouldn't have been in the money. But poor people, black and white, voted against their children because they knew so little about percents. Just a fundamental. I mean, when my campus said we had 100% increase in women faculty in physics. And I got all these letters from presidents saying, you all have become the leader. Well, we'd gone from 1 to 2. So one comment to all of you historians, don't let somebody just tell you the percent. Don't do that. Get the base. There's some fundamental things that about Moses would say a civil right, about just knowing how to think, right? And so for me, though, it's always, when I chaired the Maryland Humanities Council, it's about getting people to connect the disciplines. Yeah. It's very important, very important.
Let me say this real quick. Good people, you've been patient. This will be the last little question maybe we do, and then maybe we could throw it open to the audience from there. Well, you know, Professor Cole and Dr. Hrabowski have been prodigies since you know they were toddlers, and so they've been able to know which way to go all the time. What I would like to know, and I bet some of you all too, you've never asked the question because you're very polite. I have no class. I'm like a teacher on Thanksgiving, no class, right?
That was really cool.
That was a good one.
Right here. That was definitely a professorial joke.
Right. I got that from Fat Albert, you know, back in the day. But what did you do wrong? What did you do wrong? You have a storied career. What did you do wrong?
No, you know, college presidents ask me that question. What did I do wrong and what should they guard against? The first thing I did wrong was I have such intensity and passion for the work that I didn't take care of my health. When I'm talking to leaders or professionals, I'm saying, don't let anything get in the way of your health. And I had to really, I was told before I was 40, that if I didn't change my habits, I would have a heart attack well before I was 40. And I needed to really go on biofeedback, medication, all kinds of things, because I was just not getting enough sleep. I was stressing out, and so health was a big issue. And it had been all my life. I was always working too hard. I really was. Number two, I always thought that you had to be perfect, that you had to get it right. And what you learn in administration is that you rarely get it completely right. You get some parts of it. You listen, you do the best you can. We have shared governance, and if you're lucky, a lot of people will say, good job. But there are always gonna be some people who are not happy. In fact, I say, this is what you call one of those Hrabowski statements, that effective leadership means keeping everyone minimally dissatisfied. I want you to think about that, all right? I mean, just want you to think about that. So no, and I've worked to do, because if one group gets too happy, there's another group that's really upset. Whatever it is, it's just reality. But finally, the adding to that question, people say, if you had the chance to do some things over again, would you do it? I would not. What I've come to appreciate is every failure has made me stronger, wiser. If you don't fail, you can be very shallow. Everybody knows my campus rolls their eyes when I'm studying French. I started 3 or 4 years ago, and my students said, don't you think you're kind of old? That was all I needed, right? So, je parle français avec mes étudiants tous les jours. Mon professeur est un originaire de Normandie. Il est normand, il est très difficile. So I'm studying French every day. And what's interesting about that is that what I see is that the more I learn, it's something that Beckett would say in one of his characters, the more I learn, the more I realize I have so much more to learn. Because even when I can translate the words, you've got context. You know, the words mean different things, different people. And so there are layers of meaning. And so when people say, are you fluent? Of course not. No, and I just, si vous parlez lentement, je peux comprendre. Peut-être. I can understand fairly well. I can read, and I'm reading La Philosophe. But I'm also reading Les Misérables de la Terre, Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, right? Yeah. And c'est très difficile. Now, what is my point? I am making mistakes all the time. My students, many of whom speak French as the first language, because my students, 60% of my students have a parent from another country. They loved correcting mon prononciation, right? And I loved their doing it because it showed them I was still learning. And that is the point I would make. Beckett talks about Malloy, who studied the dancing of bees, and he says, here's something I could study all my life and never fully understand. And the significance was he said it with great rapture, because the more he studied the dancing of the bees and began to understand, the more he realized he had so much more to learn. And that is the essence, it seems to me, of our journeys as professors, as president, that we will keep making mistakes and they can make us better. Yeah.
All right.
Solid. Let's turn to you all. You've been patient. Please, let's do it this way. Questions and brief comments. Good questions and brief comments. Yeah.
So while you're coming, Robbie, the Nobel laureate in physics in the 40s, said that when he was growing up, all of his friends' mothers would say to them at the end of a school day, "What'd you learn in school today?" He said, "But not my Jewish mother." He said, "My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" And that practice of encouraging his curiosity made him the thinker he became. So don't let me leave this group saying they are not curious. Please, ask me questions, criticize me, anything, please. Always that first person. Come on.
There she is, right there. There she is.
Oh, hey. What my fellow Ilana?
Just going to break the ice here, right?
Yeah.
We got a lot of issues today. We got a Supreme Court hearing questions about affirmative action and its future. What strategies would you ask us to think through so we can be better helping the general public think through where they can go so they can be their best selves?
That's excellent question. You know, there are two levels. The Supreme Court's conversation right now, clearly the election, and we're seeing what the polls are showing us right now. And one of the deans today said, how do we not give up when we get these very, very serious and unwanted decisions, right? And the first thing I said was this, again, about going back to history. We've been here before. We really have. I think it's a time when historians can be very helpful to our country in putting in perspective where we are today. And it is a challenging time, but we have been through challenging times before. And so, oh, it never been today. Yes, for many people, yes, it was. Wait a minute, when the GI Bill came along, who was it that fought that GI Bill? When the veterans were really excited about going to college for the first time in the 40s, who fought the bill? Do you know? President of Harvard and the president of the University of Chicago. And they said, if you allow them, meaning regular people, mainly white guys,
Yes,
regular white
that's what
guys, some women, some blacks, but mainly white, if you allow them into our universities, they will become academic hobo jungles. Now, for people who were college educated, those times may have been pretty good. But for people who were not, who weren't even getting Social Security before a few years of that, times were hard as hell. They really were. But it took a couple of million veterans coming in to show America that regular people could do it, so that by 1965, we did. I talk about that arc of justice moving towards, bending towards justice. But I say in that talk at Harvard, it will only bend in the right way if we make it bend in the right way. It's not going to happen on its own. That's the point I would make. That we look at history to shine light on where we've been before as we look for lessons that can help us today. From the fact that there was a time when women and blacks and others could not vote, to now having suppression, a time when women were not in control of their bodies, and we are back there right now, right? So it's helping people understand it doesn't have to be this way. The worst thing that could happen would be for people to have such despair to say, we're down the tubes. No, we cannot do that. We cannot, and it will take, though, educating more people and using those lessons from history and moving towards actions. And it's actions well beyond the protests and the marches. It really is about critical thinking and voting and who's in office that can make the difference. And that's where we're going to have to go with all. And then with the affirmative action, it's helping people understand what are the issues, right? You know, one of the things that, you know, as an educator, I'm seeing more and more universities that are making tests optional, which should have an impact, maybe not immediately, but I'm going to say something that will sound politically incorrect. In my institution, we are the largest producer of blacks for any kind of university. who go on to get PhDs in the natural sciences and engineering and MD PhDs. In fact, the woman who created the Moderna vaccine is one of my graduates. First black woman in the world to create a vaccine. Give Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett a round of applause.
Yes.
Big round of applause for that. And what I would say to you is some of the greatest contributors didn't have perfect scores. Nothing like perfect scores,
Right.
no. Those tests are not, we give them much too much credit. There's a limit. After a certain point, you've got reading skills problems, having written questions for the math SAT. But at a certain point, you've got a good shot of doing it. We have not done the kind of analysis that we need to do there, particularly when talking about tests being optional. But if we're only going on grades and test scores, we probably could find enough people of Asian background to fill every position. I had to say that to some whites who were upset because one kid had a 95th percentile on the MCAT, the black kid had a 90th percentile, and the black kid got into more prestigious medical schools. And they said, it shouldn't be like that. It's got to be only with test scores and grades. I said, well, if that's the case, we probably can find an Indian for every slot. So you, white guy, you won't be there either. All right? And if you only go by test scores and grades, but that's not the way you measure how effective somebody will be on the job. So we've got a lot of work to do at that level.
I'm going to ask a question from the perspective of someone who teaches at a state university.
I'm going to ask you to stand so I can hear
Oh,
you.
sorry. I'm going to ask a question from the perspective of someone who teaches at a different state university. If you think about Maryland legislature,
Yes.
what has been the change in the legislature in its attitudes towards higher education that makes you feel the most optimistic?
Yeah.
And what's the change in the Maryland legislature in the last 35 years that makes you the most concerned?
Very good question. Maryland is far more privileged than most. We are far more bipartisan than most, which is a term the country doesn't really know at this point. But we've had a very reasonable Republican governor in a Democratic state with a Democratic legislature. What gives me the greatest hope and encouragement is that one of my students from UMBC is the first woman and first black head of the House of Delegates. Give her a round of applause, Delegate Adrian Jones. And she is with a background in the social sciences and has really helped with others to lead to legislation involving everything from more money for colleges and universities, more money for K through 12, more funding of the police, but more accountability, both, right? And issues involving crime. I mean, the biggest challenge in Maryland, we are in the top 2 or 3 states in the union when talking about best educated. Both K through 12 and that. People look at Baltimore, but the card, and one of the reasons is so many of our students, so many of the people here have a parent from another country. The largest infrastructure of science and technology is in the Baltimore-Washington corridor. NSA, NIH, NASA Goddard, all of them, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. So large proportions of scientists and engineers, and then rich cultural institutions. And so the good news is the legislature appreciates the fact that we are so privileged because we are so well educated relative to others, and that is because of universities, public and private colleges and universities. So we've had better funding in recent years than ever. We really have. My campus has had $1 billion in construction the past 15 or so years. Part of that is my fighting for it, but an enlightened legislature really is. What concerns me more than anything else in our cities, whether it's Baltimore or Chicago, is the violence, the challenge we face. This is real. It's very real. We want to deal with the accountability with the police. That's one piece of it. But the largest proportion has to do with many factors leading to children killing children, young people killing young people, heavily of color. All right? And we have not gotten our hands around that. In Baltimore, we're working on it. The mayor is one of my mentees, young man, young, well-educated 40-year-old. The next governor of our state is one of my mentees, will be the first black governor, Wes Moore. Give him a round of applause. He's a Rhodes Scholar. Not bad to have a Rhodes Scholar.
And a member of Alpha Phi.
That's right, member of our fraternity.
Yes.
That's right. I'm
Yes.
very proud of him. And he, along with legislators, what encourages me is just that they know we've got to get a handle on both the crime and the other factor that we're working on with our current commission is the quality of K through 12 education, particularly for poor children of all races. If you look at the new NAEP data, children around this country, even in Boston, all the way to the South, all the way out to California, that bottom 40 to 45, 50% of children who are from lower income, working class families went way back in reading and mathematics. And there's one thing builds on another. You learn French in levels, music in levels, reading in levels, math in levels, and we are not getting to even the 8th grade level. Or something. That is the thing, and that is a concern with not just my state, but the country. What's encouraging is, I really do believe our elected officials get that we have a lot of work to do. That's the point. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. But I wanted to ask, so thinking about our current similar political moment, what do educational leaders do at a time when states and lots of groups are concerned with history and CRT, right? And they're actively working against teachers who are teaching history or who are trying to reduce the funding for positions for people who teach history or remove teachers from schools that are doing this. How do you do this and still have the kind of impact that you were talking about a few minutes ago?
And you know, we talked, some of the deans talked about this, depending what state they're in and that kind of thing. There's several things I would say. I've always believed that when the language becomes a barrier, you change the language. We can talk about seeking the truth and helping people understand the history of our country without ever having to use the expression CRT, or critical race theory, because as soon as you use it, you've lost so many people. Nobody knows what it means except the lawyers and some scholars, right? So why even use it? But I continue to say when I'm in the Deep South, wherever I am, but we all want to know the truth. The truth is that 90% of Americans, first of all, were not educated even in the 60s. That there were far more white people who were poor than black people. That a larger concentration of people of color were black, but that you had poor people. And I'm always wanting to use language that makes it clear we can talk about the challenges of each group, but we ought to say what are the things also that are common, that we have in common. Poor children have a hard time in America, of any race, you see. I spoke to the Georgia Association of School Boards, and they were talking about the civil rights era, and people were very uncomfortable. And a white guy gets up and says, I'm CEO of my company, I'm president of the school board of my town, and I'm rich, and I'm white, and I'm male, and you assume that I come from money. Nothing could be further from the truth. He said, my mother was a sharecropper because my dad had died. We saw the little Negro children going to college in the 70s. And she said, I want my children to go to college. And because I went to college, my sisters went to college, and we moved out of poverty. He said, so when you talk about the civil rights movement, don't think it's just for blacks and women. It is for all of us. People were not sending their kids to college, and that Voting Rights Act, that Higher Education Act, that Civil Rights, all were there together. We have to use that history to help people understand that we all benefited. This is where the inclusive excellence comes in. We've got to find ways of getting more people to see this is about all of us. We're not trying to leave anybody out. We're not trying to frighten people saying we're taking your job. We want more jobs for all our children. I mean, it's got to be that approach rather than just saying, no, we're going to keep using this same language. And I'm going to say the same thing about affirmative action, because there's all kinds of affirmative action. I mean, when you look at the most prestigious institutions and how affirmatively kids who have parents who can give all kinds of endowments have definitely gotten in. We can all think about very wealthy people who've gone to very wealthy places because of that wealth. That was quite affirmative, all right? So, I mean, the idea of affirmative action, we've got to just, sometimes the language gets in the way of the purpose. That's what I would say, okay?
And this may end up being the last question unless somebody had something.
Hey.
Thank you. I loved everything you said. And everything just resonated. I wrote the first, V.P. Franklin, who used to teach at Illinois, and he has this book
Tell
called...
them who you are and what you do now.
I'm Linda Perkins, and, you know, history of it forever. And I'm a university professor at Claremont Graduate University. He wrote this book, Children of the Movement, and it just came out last year. And I was just struck by children with the movement, you know, of the civil rights movement. And And when it comes to the GI Bill, yeah, all these ethnic white men, it put them solidly in the middle class. There's a documentary, the GI Bill, and it showed this one guy became a Nobel laureate.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And he never would have gone to college, he said.
Yes.
Except for that. But I wanted to ask you, I'm from Mobile, and definitely we in the same
I
generation.
forgot that you were from Alabama.
Yeah.
I wanted to say who she was because we were grad students together.
Oh,
Now she's a
yeah,
professor,
and,
give her a round of applause, and I'm very proud of
she's the
that.
No. I mean, and like you know, grew up middle class. I mean, Vivian Malone lived around the corner from us.
Yes.
You know, and integrated, you know the story.
Yeah.
But I don't, I'm trying to be more optimistic because we live in a time now where people are anti-education.
Yeah.
They're anti-truth. They don't want to hear any, quote, evidence. And, they're trying to dismantle our democracy, actually.
Right.
And so how do we do that? And also, there's an increasing number of conservative people of color, who
Yes.
sort of buy into this too, know, and I don't,
Yes.
it's a difference between when we grew up, and it was the community, we all working together, but it's not that way anymore, and give me some hope.
So let me start by saying, and then you would appreciate this growing up in Alabama. Believe it or not, most black people were not happy that Martin King was agitating things in Birmingham. Because middle-class blacks were worried it would make things worse for them. It really was. And most would say A students should not have been marching. My teachers said, no, you're an A student. You're not supposed to be involved in that. And they meant well. They meant well, right? And they were worried about what would happen in jail. We didn't know, So what I'm saying is that even in the black community in the 60s, now everybody claims them, but people were scared.
Yeah.
With the lynches and everything, I just didn't know, right? I mean, so you start there. But secondly, when we think about education, this is what I said to the deans. We've got the media of all types, but all on all different levels, different on the continuum. But the media people are so quick to say how people no longer believe in education. Show me a family that has had success with one generation in college that doesn't want the next generation to go to college. I'm talking 2 and 4 year. If you look at it, once the family has some success in college, right now some numbers are down, but look at who the numbers are down upon. It's the people who've not had success. One of our big challenges is that so many students, millions of students of all races, go to college, never graduate, and they have bills. And you've got about $1 trillion of that with for-profits. Yeah. And nobody has the courage to talk about the low graduation rates at the for-profits. And they've got the best commercials on TV. Sure. The guy, the football player who's talking to his dead mom about getting her his degree. That gets them 100 people right there. Oh, right. It's really, it's scary. So what am I saying? I'm saying it's up to us in the academy to be passionate champions for education, for history, and we must be the ones saying to our students and to the communities, we cannot give up. The day after this election, when the Supreme Court does what we know it's going to do, we cannot give up. We've got to believe that this whole vote can make a difference. If nothing else, where would the world be if we hadn't had higher education when thinking about the COVID crisis? On so many levels, from people in the social sciences and the disaggregating of data, to the people in the sciences, to the ethical people working on things. Where would we be? We've got to use all the examples possible. And right now, it will take our thinking about how people fought in the 20s for women to get the vote, or my grandmother having to take the Alabama literacy test in the 60s, when white men could put an X by their name and vote. And she had to learn the Constitution and literally took friends the second time to memorize the questions and then brought them to my mama, the teacher, so that she could study the Constitution. And that third time, she became a voting citizen. She was over 70 years old. And she was so proud. She cried. We all cried. But it's that notion of what people have done to have that vote. We take it for granted. I quoted Tocqueville today in his Democracy in America when he said, nothing is more wonderful than having this privilege of freedom. But freedom is the hardest thing to learn how to use. We've got it, but we take it for granted. You think about, we get happy when a certain percent vote, but so many are not voting and still don't realize they're not voting is having such an impact on their families. And that's a part of the lesson we have. But it will be the people in the social sciences and humanities who can really help us. Imagining America is a great example of the humanities and arts working on issues of cities.
That is one. You have a quick one?
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's kind of get your view on how can we increase more African Americans in education. I've been teaching for 20 years. A lot of times I'm in schools where it's one or two of us.
Yes.
And,
Repeat the question.
And also when we deal with a lot of the battles.
Start
that
the question again with the mic, would you?
Oh, sorry. I said, how can we increase the number of African Americans or just, ethnic groups in general?
Yeah.
Increasing those numbers in teaching in our secondary and lower level schools, not just college, of course.
Yes.
Like I said, teaching for 23 years, we come into this space, you're a lot of times one out of two maybe in school.
Yeah.
And so you carry a lot of weight because of that. All the students for you to carry the torch.
Yep.
And so I definitely want to see what is your viewpoint on how we can increase that, get more kids interested. I know if we talk about the pay, sometimes that doesn't, enlighten anyone, but definitely want to see what your thoughts are about that.
Sure. So we work to model, the Meyerhoff program is for people who want to become scientists, research engineers. But we started other programs such as the Sherman Scholars for people to become teachers. We started with middle school STEM teachers. That's where we have the biggest challenge because most middle school teachers haven't had a calculus course where they teach in algebra, all right? But we have expanding it to be pre-K through 8. And we're using the same model as Meyerhoff. If you look at the UMBC Sherman Scholars Program, it's for high achievers who want to teach, and particularly to teach in challenging schools, where you have large percentages of Title IX kids and others. And we built an endowment for it, we get grant money for it, and the donors who are white said we want a lot of those people, not all, but a lot of them to be people of color, and especially some blacks, and especially some black males, to help the children in Baltimore City. Okay, so we've got now a big group of them, and it grows. It's the idea of building community. It's like, I love the fact one of my graduates is the president of Clemson, and he's a wonderful first-generation college white kid who's now in his 50s, who has this commitment to racial justice, social justice. So he has the Call Me Mr. program on his campus for all of the schools in South Carolina to produce men of color who will become teachers. And the program is called Call Me Mr. because there's so few men of color who are in teaching. And it's very impressive, it really is. It's those programs of community. Some people know the posse group programs, for example. Those communities of people, because what it does, those communities teach people that you're doing it not just to get a paycheck. You're doing it for a bigger purpose, a higher purpose. My mother always said, I'll leave you with this story from my mom when she had developed dementia, and we convinced her to come up here. And she was so clever, had been a math teacher and an English teacher, that she could hide the dementia in many ways. I was an only child, and we were sitting out on the porch, and I knew she didn't know who I was, but she said, I know the end is near. And I said, well, what's important to you? And this is my gift to all of you, because you're all professors, you're all teachers. She said, what's important? Relationships. And she saw I was really struggling, trying to be positive, and she said, my relationship with my God. She said, hold on to your faith, you're gonna be okay. And then she said, my relationship with my husband, he's a wonderful man. She had forgotten Daddy had died years before, and I'd learned when they have dementia, you don't remind them. You just go with it, right? Then she said something that shocked me. She says, look me right in my face. She says, I have a son. I'm thinking, oh my God, she had a kid when she's a teenager. She's gonna drop this bomb on me and die. I don't want a brother. If I haven't had a brother this far, I don't want a brother. Don't you drop this on me. So all my grief turns to real anger, right? And she said, look at my face. He's a college president. She was talking about me. She didn't know I was that, right? But here's my gift to you. She said, but I always want you to remember, teachers touch eternity through their students. Teachers touch eternity. She said, whatever I had to give, my lust for learning, my teaching them to believe in themselves, I will live through them. And that is what we want to get students to appreciate. When I told you, Jalen, I want you to teach, right? EJ, to think about it. When you've taught a student, you're never the same. You're never the same. We want to make people, help them to appreciate the nobility of teaching at all levels. It's very important. Thank you. Okay.
Bravo.
To you all. I love it. Great. It's wonderful.
Thank you all so much. Please enjoy your evening, and we'll see you in the morning time. Be ready to rock and roll.
I want you to just think about this, all of you. This is the first time in my 50-year history that I have sat on the stage with two young scholars in the social sciences who are already superstars. Give them a round of applause, would you please? I am honored. I am truly honored.
Thank you, brother. See you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.